All right. Welcome to AI Salon, where we talk about AI safety related issues and the broader community. And today we have Nolan Kent with us. To give you a little background on Nolan, Nolan was originally involved with reverse engineering antivirus software. That's how he got into AI, originally as a hobby and on a technical level. Then he quit his job to focus on it and thinking through some of those scenarios, worst case scenarios, and the alignment problem made him depressed, as is a common story I've heard before. But he got on the personal growth path and started studying meditation, and that helped him a lot. So let's introduce Nolan Kent, and I want to hear more about yourself and your story.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, a bit more background there. When I quit my job, I was like, yeah, I read the laws papers, and I was like, okay, I'm going to buy NVIDIA, and that let me continue to use my strategy of distraction for a while. And yeah, it didn't necessarily feel like a super deep depression. It was just, okay, I'm not doing anything that feels important. I'm just distracting myself. Um,
Okay. So
and
sort of like a lack of like aimlessness or
Yeah,
lack
yeah,
of
and
purpose.
yeah, and it felt like a bit like apathy as well. Um,
Okay.
yeah, uh,
So as you said, you bought NVIDIA based on scaling laws and being able to intuit based on that what the likely trajectory of the market was going to be. So
I mean, it
congratulations on
was,
that, I guess.
yeah, yeah. I mean, it didn't have to go that way, but it let me I guess, keep the lifestyle that I was living, which was great. Yeah,
Okay.
and
Yeah, that's fair. Um, okay, it's cool. Thank you for the elaboration. So let's maybe talk a little bit about, let's maybe go through it chronologically. So your your position before was at an antivirus company, right?
yeah,
What
semantic.
was that? At Symantec. And what was that position like, and why did it lead to you thinking about AI?
Okay, yeah, that was really fun. It was taking files that were sent in by customers and reverse engineering them to see if they were malicious and if they were trying to add antivirus detection for them. And yeah, it was great. Felt like a hacker. I loved the aesthetic of it, and it was a tight-knit team and really fun.
Mhm.
And so there's two parts to the how I got involved with AI from there. One was just as a personal hobby because I was interested in image generation, and did some blog posts about that. And the other was thinking about how one of my strategies for analyzing malware was sort of treating it as an image, or like looking at it in this ASCII view, kind of like opening it in a notepad program and then scrolling through. And it turned out that there's visual patterns that you could pick up on that made it very easy to detect many types of malware. And so I wanted to apply convolutional neural networks to that. And that was an interesting project. It did not, I would not say it fully succeeded. Yeah, and there was some stuff with like the company getting acquired and some reprioritization of the team as well.
Mhm.
But
What
yeah,
year was that, by the way?
I want to say that was like 2019 or 2020.
Okay.
Um, yeah.
All right. So when as you said, it wasn't fully successful, and there were other features of the company that made it not so. So
Yeah, yeah, and
what's
also
your
like
like? Yeah.
I'll take responsibility for that too.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was like yeah, it was yeah, I think that there was potential with it. The main idea behind it was there's different types of malware packers that will use this kind of shoddy encryption, because they
Hmm.
don't really care that much about the encryption part because they're going to decrypt the the payload anyway. They just want to make it hard for the antivirus to detect the file.
Hmm.
Um, and so yeah, there'll be sections that have this very weird pattern in them visually because it's just poorly encrypted data, like a
Hmm.
32 byte XOR or some kind of XOR, or
Hmm.
something that simple. And those visual patterns are very easy to pick up on for me, which made detecting some types of malware really fast. And so my goal was just to say, like, try and get a convolutional neural network that could easily pick those out. Um, and there's like questions about how one might deploy that. And while I think we did get some proof of concept that it could work, the question of like all the rest of the stuff I didn't really know how to deal with. and like how to get it deployed and like
Okay.
where to fit it in. Yeah, that
Yeah,
didn't
so
work out.
that's okay. Yeah, so there's an interesting set of engineering and pipeline questions that are involved with that. Did you try to roll your own CNN, or were you using an existing image detection framework? Or
Both. Yeah.
okay. Yeah, I'm just thinking about how you would choose to do that today.
Mhm.
And it's very possible that you might have had a better time. There's so much more tooling out there these
Yeah.
days.
Yeah,
Yeah,
possible. Yeah,
yeah.
and I think now I would know more about what would need to go into making an internal project like that successful too.
Mhm.
Which is,
Yeah. Also on a technical level, besides using visual detection systems, were there other potentially cheaper tools that you could have used on the byte stream that would have been able to detect the same thing?
so I don't think so. There's some like I tried to come up with a set of heuristics that might do it, but it was sufficiently diverse, partly because they're always coming out with new malware packers to avoid whatever the latest antivirus definitions are.
Okay.
And so while I could visually detect these new ones, if I just came up with a set of heuristics, then like they would be able to bypass that pretty easily.
Okay. So
And so,
yeah. So the visual approach has higher generality.
yes, that was my belief. And it makes sense. It would still there'd still probably be some cat and mouse to it, as there always would be. But I my hope was that it would make it significantly more difficult for new hackers to effectively evade uh, antivirus software.
Okay. I mean, that's still an interesting hypothesis.
Mhm.
But from there, you ended up getting more involved with AI as a hobby, and you said you wrote some blog posts. Was it
Yeah,
mostly
yeah.
on this problem or other problems?
No, it was mostly image generation. Like I was playing around with GANs. This was
Yeah.
before diffusion, and so that was yeah some interesting challenges there. Um,
Yeah.
yeah.
Uh, so in retrospect, what do you think about GANs? Like, do you have any thoughts about them in modern
Uh,
context?
not any strong thoughts. It's just okay. This was an interesting approach to kind of sample new images, and
Yeah.
yeah, also somewhat frustrating at times.
Oh,
Uh,
yeah.
yeah,
Y-
it worked better than all the other methods I tried, like variational autoencoders and flow based models.
Yeah.
So it did the job at the time, but yeah, I don't
Yeah.
really have nostalgia for them. Um,
Yeah. I don't know. GANs are some of my favorites just because of their genesis. Like, you know the backstory of them, right?
not off the top of my head.
Okay. So I'd like to, like, anyone who's listening to this in the audience should double check me on this. But the backstory is Ian Goodfellow was at a bar with some of his colleagues, and they were kind of drunk on alcohol, and they were having an argument about Boltzmann machines, and he ended up saying that the GAN approach would totally work for image generation, and his colleagues said no, it totally wouldn't, and they got kind of competitive about it.
Hmm.
And this was based on having different intuitions about Boltzmann machines and their stable states, because it wasn't really obvious at all whether they would, like, the results would actually converge or not, like before you actually built the thing. But he went home and built a prototype, and it converged while he was still drunk,
Nice.
according to the
Okay.
story.
Yeah, that rings a bell. Uh,
Yeah. Um, but I love that story just because it's like, um, like even in his own recounting, he said basically because he was in an altered state, that he was willing to explore that idea. Whereas
hmm.
if he had been sober, he probably would have rejected it offhand. If he, no,
Oh yeah.
this won't converge.
Yeah. Yeah. That sounds
But
familiar.
yeah, and it turns
Uh,
out they totally work.
yeah.
Yeah, so that's pretty cool. So what prompted quitting your job to focus full time on AI?
Part of it was that I felt like I'd made enough money to. Another part was that um yeah, it felt important and also that it would kind of, solve or destroy everything anyway. And
Hmm.
so I might as well, spend the time focusing on what seems really important to me.
All
Uh,
right, but there's a leap going on from using CNNs to and
Mhm.
thinking about GANs to
Yeah.
thinking that this is really important. What
Yeah.
what
Yeah. Part of
what
that
happened?
came from from my early kind of experiments, especially in the capacity as a hobby, like I would generate images and then play with the features and see what I could do with that. And just from that, there was a felt sense of it being extremely powerful and being able to like the future of it seeming very, I guess, bright or important. Um, and yeah, so from that felt sense, it was that I think that's the main thing that prompted. It wasn't a super. I mean, I put some thought into it, but uh, yeah, it wasn't a particularly like emotional or hard decision. It was just okay. And there's also a sense that I could always go back and do similar things.
Hmm.
What ended up making it a fairly longer duration than I originally planned um, was partly the stock continuing to go up, so I could continue to not work,
I
and
see.
also yeah, and also like I was just doing everything that that version of myself would do with a bunch of free time,
Hmm.
and eventually like working through all the things I wanted to do like with the capacity I had, and then moving on to the next thing, and eventually ended up in a space that where I was just like kind of distracted and focused on pleasure, and like okay, just having fun browsing the internet kind of stuff.
Okay.
Um,
All
and
right.
yeah, and again, what kind of brought me out of that was meditation.
Okay. So that sounds sort of interesting because, okay, I want to dive more into the like flow that led you to one place and that let
Sure.
you out of it as well. But like you've described that based on just working with GANs and seeing the results and seeing the power of it, which I'm assuming is previous to your understanding of what algorithms could do.
Oh, yeah. So another aspect of it was for me was veganism and combining like animal rights and AI is what led me to effective altruism. And
Okay.
yeah, uh,
So you had separate interests. So so we're both people who don't eat animals. So that's a common interest. And you became a vegan. Was it about the same time or much earlier? When was
it
that?
was earlier. That was like 2017.
Okay. And what led you there?
It felt right to me. I don't have a
It
lot
felt
of
right.
yeah, like
Yeah.
You shared a
But
beautiful frame.
yeah.
You'd like to imagine that a more intelligent being
Oh yeah.
would treat us the same way we end up treating things like
Yeah,
these.
yeah, that is the frame that's become more salient to me over time.
mhm.
I don't know if that was there originally, but it does. One of the intersections with AI for me is just yeah, kind of treating less intelligent beings how I'd like a more intelligent being to treat me.
There's
Um,
an extension of the golden rule. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Okay. And like, okay, back in 2017, the thing that motivated you to become vegan was that, or you said that that's something that developed over time. At that
Uh,
time, was it more
yeah,
just like,
I'd say it was a fairly long time. It was just there was internal resistance to actually doing it. It'd be like,
mhm,
oh, this is something I feel like I should do based off, I guess, a number of factors, and like thinking about how I feel about animals and so on.
yeah,
But there was other attachments I had like to the food I liked in particular. Um,
yeah,
and yeah, I've actually gone a bit looser with it now. So I'll I like sometimes buy clothes that have might have wool where I would be like very against that before. Um,
okay,
but yeah, it still feels very important to me. Uh,
okay. So you're vegetarian leaning vegan.
yeah, I mean
Yeah,
that's yeah. I'd say it's more like vegan leaning vegetarian.
yeah,
But
okay.
the yeah
Veganish, yeah,
yeah
yeah,
the strictness or like the priority I gave it, I guess, ended up feeling a little tense. I think part of that is because I got involved with some communities that were like very vigilant, and parts
yeah,
of me still appreciates that.
hmm,
But it's also like some of the sense was that if I don't do like exactly this, then I'll be like exiled from the community, which
yeah,
is I think
yeah, not so
it's
nice.
very common from just passionate groups like it. And I don't think it's deliberate. It's just okay, we all care about this passionate thing, and then there's a tension around moving away from it.
Yeah.
And I don't want to say I feel like I've moved away from it significantly, but yeah, I'm not like checking all my alcohol to make sure it's like they haven't used the animal products refining, for example.
Okay. Yeah. I'm familiar with that. I'm still in the phase of checking my alcohol, but
Okay, nice.
like there are, yeah, there are other things like I'm still not buying wool products, and
Mhm.
but if it's when it comes to stronger stuff, like
Yeah,
I do have mixed feelings about boundaries on that. Like here's an interesting question. When it comes to treating beings who are differently intelligent than us, but that we still recognize as intelligent, like, do you subscribe to like a hierarchy of complexity, or do you take a more totalistic view of like if it has a brain at all or a brain stem, it's like
yeah.
how do you navigate that
So I haven't
conundrum?
updated my thinking on that recently. Generally, I'd say like, okay, if there's animal neurons, then time to be cautious.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes some sense. I know a lot of vegans come to it to that point. Of course, you get like interesting boundary conditions, which is that, um, like animal as a category includes some species that don't have any centralized neurons, and like how
Hmm.
can it possibly be sentient,
Yeah.
which is where I am at the moment. Like
Yeah.
I think that
Yeah.
there's a pretty like it's good to have a lot of caution, but
Hmm.
then there's some point when that caution stops making sense, which is probably like at the oyster level. Um,
Mm. Yeah,
but
I'd agree
yeah.
with that.
Yeah, exactly.
Though, yeah, I still don't eat. Yeah, I still haven't eaten oysters. I think part of that is because I don't like them very much. But like, yeah,
Also
I'm
a good
also,
reason.
yeah. I mean, it's complicated. It's very complicated.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, and like, I don't deliberately buy wool. I just realized that this shirt that I got is probably wool, and I'm not gonna like kick myself too hard for it. Where
Yeah.
in the
I mean,
past
that's
I'd probably,
probably healthy.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah, yeah. There's,
I want to
yeah.
bring back to AI
yeah.
things.
Okay,
How can
cool.
I?
No, this ends up being related. Like,
I like the resonance here, but I also
Okay.
appreciate that because I think
I'm
it's
enjoying
yeah,
it
yeah.
too, and I'm wanting to bring the resonance maybe more legibly for
Mhm.
AI things for me.
All right, cool.
yeah. I mean, this seems pretty related because, like, when you're thinking about your own personal ethics and like what you choose to engage in, or like, and then more so when there's a reflection of what you're doing, and you kind of take the position that okay, what I do is related somehow to what others do. And then you take it even further and say, what I do may be related to what a synthetic intelligence does. There's definitely there is definitely something there in terms of like your beliefs about what AI is and what it can be in the future. That's important. Like, what is the link that you draw? Like, how much have you thought about why your own beliefs as they manifest might be related to the beliefs that an artificial intelligence would have?
Yeah, I don't have a extremely strong logical sense of why that might be. I think it's like I think I could come up with reasons.
Mhm.
It just seems like yeah, it's more a vague notion of like trying to better embody the things that I'd want to see
Mhm.
generally. And
Yeah.
that's more of a heuristic. But
Mhm.
I like it.
Yeah. I mean, my natural intuition matches that. Like, if I'm not thinking about it too much, and I'm like, just like, what should I do? That feels right. And when I think about it more deeply, it seems when it's human to human, that works really well. Like there's a sense in which there's a reflexive ethics, and other beings who are human have enough in common with me where if they go through the same exercise of what would I want other people to behave like, including me in a big system, you end up arriving at close enough ethical systems, right?
Yeah.
And then, yeah, the question of whether that actually would apply to an artificial general intelligence is more uncertain for me, even though it feels like something that seems like there might be some universalizing like meta ethics that converge. At the same time, when you have like a singleton, like a single artificial intelligence, or maybe a small community of intelligences that don't die and don't relate to each other in the same way we relate to each other, that the point of convergence may be significantly different from the one that I would arrive at as a human in a human society.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm intrigued. I definitely want to go back and like revisit this, like check the recording and go through that again. It's not
Yeah,
something
for
I've been
sure.
thinking as much lately. Um,
Hmm.
but I do think there's some relevance, like part of it could be just signaling, um, this
Yeah,
is a being that like I don't need to be treating this being this way, but I am. So maybe that means something. Uh,
yeah,
that'll mean something to other people. Uh, and yeah, yeah, it's
yeah.
not, it doesn't to me feel like the most salient like thing to focus on in terms of making sure life flourishes in the way that I'd hope for it to.
Mm,
Um, that for me is like very much around harmony, but especially around human harmony to start out with, because I feel like humans are going to be the ones making the stuff and driving things forward. Um,
okay.
and I think I I think it's important to incorporate other beings as well. Um, but yeah, just in terms of what's going to most powerfully influence the future and especially the near and medium term, um, human coordination and harmony uh, is feels very important to me. Yeah.
Okay. Let's. Okay. I'm trying to see how to guide this, but since we're, yeah, let's just go with what you're suggesting: human coordination and harmony.
Hmm.
Um, what do you see the state of the world as with respect to human coordination and harmony?
So my impression has been changing quite a bit because as I've gotten a better understanding of what it means for me to be internally harmonious and sort of have this internal coordination sort of in the frame of IFS, like different parts doing different things and sometimes uh, in a way kind of defecting and taking over, um, which might manifest as me being so triggered that I can't really like yeah that I start acting very reflexively, and
Mm,
there's also suffering involved with that, with which is unpleasant. Uh,
mm,
and for me, I feel like I've been moving in a direction more of yeah, it feels in some ways like internal harmony. It also feels like a less resistance. There'll still be resistances in my body that pop up, but uh, it's less bad than it used to be. And some of this will be in the context of negative emotions, like there'll be a frustration and then a resistance to frustration, or a guilt and a resistance to the guilt.
mhm,
And it seems like that's untangling a bit based off practices, like including meditation.
mm,
And my impression is that this sort of lowered resistance can also apply between people. And this is something I've been talking with Alton a lot about lately. And that feels very important for coordination and cooperation and harmony. Um, Part of the way I think about that is just having language and nonverbal communication as ways in which our neurons will communicate, like the best way that they communicate between brains. There's a very high
mhm,
bandwidth within our brains, but there's still resistance inside there, um, which I think of in some ways as like, okay, what am I subconsciously repressing? Like what am I not allowing into consciousness? And if I allow more things into consciousness, then they can be communicated between people, and then we can coordinate around them more effectively and get the things we want more effectively. At least that's how I've had it so far. Uh, yeah, and
So, Okay, let me bring you back because you covered a few different
Sure.
ideas. What's a good starting point? Pulling back to the present, like the state of the world as it is,
Hmm.
what do you see happens between, like, you gave kind of a theory about states of mind that prevent effective coordination.
Yeah.
What's the observed effect of that between
Okay.
people? Yeah.
Okay. Here's a example. Before I would experience kind of fear and the potential, like a fear, especially fear around shame, in the context of, public speaking, which this feels like an example because I believe it's live streamed. And
Yeah.
then I would have been like before the stream, I would have been like nervous and then contracting around that nervousness. Like there'd be a tension, a tight tension there that would maybe mean that I'd say, okay, I just don't feel comfortable doing this. And then whatever the neurons in my brain are producing would not be communicated to you or anyone else who would be watching. And so that's sort of like, I view that as a type of repression or like silification, like a resistance that leads to a lack of connection. And when that's there, I'm sort of just suffering alone. And when I could be, yeah, I could be communicating and we could be figuring out problems together, in a way that I think would be, yeah, would make it more likely that what I want to be fulfilled. And I can also coordinate with other people and in ways that things they want might be more fulfilled. Like we can support each other more effectively. Uh,
Mhm. Okay, I'm not using this as a value-laden term, even though it often is. So, the word is egocentric.
mhm.
Um, that is that the way that you described it is egocentric in that you're describing the, like, the aware state of you. How does that bridge to the multiple minds problem?
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. I've heard like a bunch of, first of all, I want to say that yes, for me, the word ego is definitely tied in quite strongly. But there's different, I feel like I've heard different people use it different ways. Um,
Yeah.
I think I like the frame of the ego is not necessarily something to destroy, but it's
Yeah.
something to not necessarily be bound by as strongly as at least
Hmm.
I perceive myself to having been in the past. Like the fear or the more, I guess, egoic emotions would be contracted around, like they'd be a more significant driving force for me.
Hmm.
And uh, and a loosening of that, like acknowledging that, okay, the shame can still be there, the fear can still be there, um, but it's not. Yeah, I don't feel as reactive, and I think,
Okay.
yeah, and I think it's still like I wouldn't view as ego. Like I think you said you wouldn't call it a value laden term. I mean, I part of it is I think there's I think part of what we want or part of what other people want are desires that could be definitely considered egoic. Um,
Yeah. Well,
and
like,
that's
want has an implicit
yeah,
I,
yeah. You
right?
could
So.
say everything is, and like there's some emotions or qualities I might consider less egoic, like love and compassion, and um, yeah, those maybe they transcend ego in some way. I don't know. They feel warm and fuzzy to me, in a way that fear and anger and stuff doesn't.
Right.
But I wouldn't necessarily view the ego as something to like destroy. But
Sure.
I guess less attachment to it, I think, like, will lead to more harmony. Um, yeah.
Hmm. Hmm.
Really enjoying what I imagine is you really feeling Nolan and being impacted by what he's sharing as he's sharing it too. And I see a lot of this as a crux of a lot of the work in AI and alignment and safety. that when the people who are pioneering this don't occur to me as in touch with themselves and building technology that's going to be a mirror of them, then I feel concerned.
There are a few levels on which that's true. I think some of them are like directly related to what you're talking about, and some of them are more like meta level. So like as you say, if people seem very out of alignment internally, then or let's not use seem, let's say they are out of alignment internally. There's some delta between some set of values and what they're enacting that's significant, that's caused by internal dissonance or lack of alignment. And then they're building a tool that does stuff, then you may be concerned about the tool that they're building if it has an impact on the world. So that concern goes beyond AI. It goes to
That's
like
right.
all technology, right?
Yeah, it happens that AI is one of the most like impactful technologies that will birth all other future technologies that could be like upstream of all things that, yeah.
Yeah, it's a big meta.
Final.
It's a big like ultra general technology that is advancing all other technologies, and it's also potentially the technology to end all technology.
That's right.
Which is
I mean, and
right.
I'm saying this also echoing, I know that Nolan also has this stance too, and I don't want to take too much away from this, but yeah, just reinforcing and articulating something I've heard him share with me too that I strongly resonate with.
Yeah, and I appreciate bringing that up. Yeah.
Right. Okay, so within that space, so you are pointing out what you believe is a path to human alignment, that is based on a few like starting positions that you have, which is that, you know, like something that sounds a lot like Buddhism. Like I'm assuming that's a place you're coming from, or
Yeah,
at least something.
yeah. Very close to Buddhism. Yeah.
Yeah, and that, you know, we like suffering, desire, all of this are things that we can individually liberate ourselves from, and that has society-wide effects if it's enacted. Um, and that doing so helps humans and potentially other beings that are, you know, animals and potentially other things, better align externally. So if you have better internal alignment, and you propagate that internal alignment, that gives you opportunity for better person to person and into being to being alignment.
Totally.
Right. Have you thought about like what the limitations of that are, or like what its limits are, rather than thinking,
Yeah.
what can it solve, what can't it solve?
I still feel like I'm learning what it can solve. I have a very strong felt sense that it can solve a lot. Part of that comes from just me being way happier now, just constantly, and having a sense that, okay, this is a gradient that most people could follow towards states of higher valence. And so there's some incentive to do so, but there's snarls to work through, or like ways to get stuck at local optimum that can make that harder. I mean, just looking back, one of the reasons why I wouldn't just say it's like Buddhism is because it doesn't seem like Buddhism has led to this alignment. Like it hasn't been effective at creating this alignment and spreading to the point where, we're already there. So it does seem like something more is needed. And part of this is just feeling into what is there, like what have people found out, and what more might there be, like what options might there be to produce this or like catalyze it. And yeah, I don't know what that's going to be. But there is a felt sense of potential just based off, I guess, modern practices that I've experienced in relation to Alton and the other people I met through him, and also AI, I feel like has the potential to scale things that weren't scalable before. And so there's some directions I feel are very promising. I'm also figuring out this all out for myself actively. So it's kind of like, uh, yeah, I don't know the exact metaphor, but I've heard people use like building a bridge as you're crossing it or something like that.
Hmm.
And yeah, it feels a bit like that. But at the same time, yeah, I see a lot of potential in it for doing good for everyone. And for me, it
Yeah.
also feels really, really good for me. Like just this
Hmm.
is exactly what I do to live the life I'd want to live. And yeah, and so there's no reason not to effectively. It's just everything. It does feel like everything is kind of aligned for me.
Okay. Let's
I
talk
mean, that's a big
through.
thing too. I just want to name that, and I love hearing that too.
Mhm.
And I
Yeah.
would love to hear that more from other people who are in alignment work and in AI safety. And I experience a lot of people coming at it from a very harried stance, and so I just really want to emphasize how remarkable I find that.
Hmm.
I know
So
Andrew,
with
you
yeah,
appreciate that.
yeah, yeah. So there are a few threads I want to follow. I want to make sure I don't lose them. One of them, the most recently mentioned one, was the harried stance of people in alignment. There's also a similar stance in many people who are working on capabilities. Um, and yeah, there's sort of there is an assertion that's common in the alignment and it's also the effective altruism community and several other communities that are adjacent to that, that this state of concern, of harriedness, of what you would probably call a misalignment, is a necessary state because it drives work that leads to a safer future. Do you have
Mhm.
any thoughts about those kinds of comments or where that's coming
So
from?
yeah, yeah, a couple. Uh, I would tend to disagree, but I would want to actually like talk with someone who has that position before I commit really
Yeah,
hard to
yeah.
a
I'm
disagreement.
maybe
Um,
constructing a straw man right
yeah.
now, but
Um, yeah. And so uh, some of the counter arguments I'd have was just for me, there's definitely a felt sense of having less grasping, like less um like I guess intense tension around the things these like concerns. Uh, for me, that personally kind of let me actually do more than I was doing before.
okay.
Um, and some other aspects to it are like some arguments I'd make that come from that yeah, I guess are more than just me saying I have a felt sense. Is that I think if you're like really, really focused on this one thing, it can produce tunnel vision. And so sometimes it's good to be able to relax a bit and look around. And for
Hmm.
me, part of that was looking at was what I would consider like the most basic thing, which is just the sensations that I'm experiencing. Um, and that is kind of what I think of by meditation. Um, and so having that slack, I feel is very valuable. There's other aspects to it as well. I think this kind of hairiness can lead to less harmony and less interpersonal communication um, if you tend to really tense up. And again, I feel like I'd really want to talk to people who have that stance and try and understand where they're coming from better. I think I can really feel like the care in it, like the them caring about what I believe to be the same things I care about, like human flourishing. And um, and so yeah, I don't want to do them a disservice by yeah, like arguing against their position without uh giving them a chance to respond. But yeah, for me, like yeah, I would disagree at this stage.
Okay.
That a little bit of relaxation and um yeah, less of a really strong contraction around the object of desire my impression is that that makes it more likely that the thing that's desired will be acquired. Yeah.
So to disclose my personal bias, I tend to agree with you about a few things on that side. But I do think the point that you brought up of like it would be really nice to have a person on the call who actually holds that position to be able to explain what they really mean and respond would be nice. But we don't have a person like that around at the moment.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm gonna come back and watch this recording. That feels very important to me. I want to do a bit more preparation and like thinking about how I feel about this because I think I feel about it pretty strongly, and testing that, like seeing how well I communicate that and how well, like how much the other person can communicate to me about their position. That feels like there's a lot of potential.
Yeah, there could.
Oh, sure. I guess.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. So I don't love the framing of a debate, but I'm going to say debate with a proponent of kind of strong, I guess very strong frames towards the work. Yeah.
Yeah, conversation is a good word. It's not debate.
Yeah, conversation. That's a good one. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Conversation with a proponent of the work.
I guess how I'd frame it right now is like a very anxious or like intense drive towards the good stuff. I don't think I need more context than that. Okay. I don't feel like I'm explaining it very well right now, but
yeah, no, that's perfectly fine.
At effect of the Titan realm, or people who are in orange and spiral dynamics, or people who are extremely ambitious and like really focused and loaded in a certain way, and there's a certain texture to that like hustle type of vibe. They won't self-identify as those ways, but there's a certain texture that has of striving. And I think we can.
People can be self-motivated to like again. Let's not go too deep in this because I don't want to mischaracterize.
Yeah.
Acceleration assessment.
There's a point that I think is important about the dynamics of power in the world, which is that the drivers of risk on a societal level and like planetary level are to a very large extent driven by a small number of individuals and institutions that differ from the baseline distribution significantly because they're selected for that. So a good example would be, CEOs, world leaders, those sorts of people, and startup founders as well. Like these are not people who are distributed randomly along the distribution of values, beliefs, orientations, etc. They're outliers for the most part, which I think it becomes particularly obvious when you look at world like leaders of countries. For example, they're clearly not normal. And like if that's a dynamic that people in positions of power may be selected for qualities which are antithetical to what you're trying to achieve, how do we move risk using the approaches you're talking about? Like, will it actually work?
Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of unknowns for me still right now. The biggest known is that it seems to be working very well for me, and I believe that there are technologies that could help make it faster. And so I'm not particularly confident, or I don't feel very confident that there are I'm not very confident about like categorizing people into how easily they could do this.
That's
that
also
feels
not
like a
the
really good exercise to me.
yeah, yeah.
The
That's a
onion.
useful thing to think about. Yeah.
Yeah. Uh, yeah. So thank you for bringing that up. My impression is what I do have more confidence about is just people who are similar to me. So
Hmm.
who may have had the same concerns, especially around AI.
Hmm.
And I think I'd be able to communicate the benefits better and by probably like hopefully like directly demonstrating how their lives could be better.
Hmm.
And by better, I mean just more happiness, less suffering, more internal feeling of alignment towards what they're doing. Um, and yeah, I do want that for them, and I want it more for myself as
Hmm.
well.
Yeah. So there are a few things. The reason I'm asking the questions I'm asking is I'm trying to find the boundaries and the scope of what can be achieved. Because when you're talking about the meditation path and personal growth, it's clear that for some category of people in the world, many of whom may be working on alignment or on engineering or what have you, um, these techniques and approaches work. You also said something interesting, which is that you believe AI can be used to scale these approaches, which we should come back to in a moment. Um, then, but the core claim that I think may delineate a boundary of the effectiveness in terms of global risk is if people in power are selected for traits which don't align with alignment,
Mhm.
it doesn't matter if you end up shifting 50, 70, even 90% of the population, because those dynamics will continue to select for the 10% that you didn't reach and put them in power because they have characteristics that people in power have.
Mhm.
Like, yeah,
Yeah.
power is a filter for bad. Like,
Mhm.
that's a hypothesis, right?
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
may be wrong, but
Yeah.
yeah,
I believe I can see where you're coming from.
yeah.
And yeah, and I think it's an important consideration. I don't I'm not like immediately mapping it onto uh my I guess short-term plans and
Hmm. And it's
uh
fine. Like,
it
yeah,
feel yeah, it is like a uh yeah, yeah, I think it's important to think about. I don't really have a good way around that right now. But I'm there is a felt sense of being able to tap into more possibility in the future than I am now, and I feel like I'm more tapped into more possibility now than I was in the past, and
okay.
so that makes me optimistic.
Okay. When you say tapped into more possibility, could you enumerate what those possibilities
Sure.
are? Yeah.
Um, so a lot of it for me right now is around social connection. Like I'm been very socially anxious in the past, and now I'm like I just can just talk to people. I used to be afraid of going on airplanes. Now I can do that without any concern. I used to be a major like hypochondriac, and I would get just distracted by minor health issues in a way that was almost debilitating for months, and that doesn't happen anymore. Um, or yeah,
That's significant.
recently.
Yeah.
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 So uh, and okay, so those are that's not necessarily the possibility question, but some good things that have happened. The possibilities are around just ideas about what things I could do in the world that show up for me now that did not in the past. Um, like, and some of them are like kind of basic or like just minor in my perception of the grand scheme of things. But an example is uh, going out with uh, Alton's girlfriend and handing out roses to people in San Francisco, just as like to try and make people happy. And
Mhm.
that was just like I would not that would never have come to my mind before. And in combination with Sophia, it just felt like the right thing to do. And it was a great time. And I think it yeah. Um, it it showed me a lot about human to human interaction as well. So beyond just trying to do good things for people in the short term, it also just was a valuable experience and was really fun too. Um, yeah. Yeah. And there's practices that I think bring more of this stuff to mind. So they make it more likely that uh, options will show up in consciousness. Uh, and so that's part of it. I think that the more I do those, the more I get in touch with like my perception of what's going on in the moment, and the more I get in touch with like what it is that I want. Uh, the Yeah, it all of those seem very upstream of just getting good stuff done. Yeah.
All of the things that you mentioned are of value, and if those were the only things you were trying to achieve, they would make it worth it. Because this show is about AI alignment and AI safety, I do want to draw it to the point of how do you see this type of work impacting AI?
hmm So the first thing that comes to mind is many people who work on AI making progress along these dimensions, and as a result, being much happier and more internally aligned, having an easier time communicating amongst themselves. So it's not like concern. So I think one thing there is that concerns are more likely to go addressed or to become addressed.
Mm,
Um, Positive visions are more likely to be communicated, and I guess a sort of enhancement of networking, where there's less like us versus them and more, okay, let's all kind of network together to come up with the best thing we possibly can. Um,
mhm,
and I think part of it can come from just having a very high baseline level of happiness where you don't really feel like you need to take from anyone else and you can just give because that's all there is to do when you're happy.
mm. Is that concern, like that hypothesis that you have about how it would impact the people making AI, driving your decision making about targeting for your work?
Sorry, could you expand on that about targeting? Like who I think
Yeah,
would be best? Yeah,
yeah.
so
Who to work with first? Yeah, what order
yes,
you work in with
yeah,
people?
I think yeah, it does. I think that more alignment researchers just seems obviously good to me. And I think that it's something that, is of net benefit to the person undergoing this process, or at least that's totally been my experience.
Hmm.
And I think, and again, the other part of it was that um, I feel like it's like I have some overlap in background. I haven't actually done technical alignment work,
Yeah.
but I have the language of I know I've done a lot of machine learning stuff, so that seems relevant.
Mm. Um, yeah. A concern that I would have is that people who are in a positive state of mind are like generally very happy,
Mm.
well adjusted. Like, I wish I could cite the papers that I'm thinking of, but there are biases that those type of people have towards seeing the bright side of things and things going well that
Mhm.
make them worse at predicting the future or worse at seeing certain types of outcomes.
Yeah.
Um, is there a way to address that without like banking on depressed people or people who are highly
Yeah.
suspicious? Yeah.
Yeah. So my hope and experience is something like you don't you can be happy without necessarily being optimistic. Um, and while I did say that I am more optimistic, um, I think that is somewhat separate from the practice I've been doing, or it's kind of based off. my hope for how they could make a difference for other people. But there is, I think part of this process is also just accepting that things might not go well. And kind of like being able to pre-grieve that. It's something that I need to do more of. Like I'm even just like I can feel the sadness welling up in me when I think about things not going well.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think being able to be with the negative or the parts we view as more negative, without being very reactive around them, um, will let us be more like holistic around our actions.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So
So,
yeah. So there's like this sense of not only internal alignment being achieved, and that doesn't actually mean just being giddy and
yeah.
wire-headed.
Yes.
Um,
Yes.
and then the second piece, which I think you could achieve one and not the other, and they're both kind of independent from each other, is groundedness in reality,
Mm. Hmm.
right? And so there's like the set of tools that you need to align yourself internally, and the set of tools you need to be grounded and make good predictions are they may be mutually supporting, but they're not inherently going to arrive at each other,
Yeah,
right?
I'd agree. And there is some kind of, I think if I was looking at this in a very coarse-grained way, there's like rationalist versus woo kind of, and yeah, and you
Vibes,
could
yeah,
see
for
this as
sure.
something like an
Yeah,
intersection of that. Yeah, so totally agree.
yeah. Woo is a fun word. It makes me kind of go. I have a Shipibo tapestry in the background, so I'm
Mhm.
clearly not that anti-woo, but
Mhm.
there is a degree to which I think woo points at a not good thing, and then there
Mhm.
are things that are classified as woo that are good,
I agree
and
totally.
it's yeah,
Yeah, and I think like I generally like to approach rationalist explanations of things, but I think it is especially hard to do that with human psychology, and a lot of things that are characterized as woo are like do have actual like psychological impacts, which
mhm,
does result in differences that can be quite positive. It's just
yeah.
my impression. I don't know. Like, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there are clearly things that are important to how we experience the world that are beyond the philosophy of science, right?
Yes.
Or that,
Mm.
yeah, you just can't test experimentally, and they're still important.
Yeah.
Or maybe you
Yeah.
could, but it would be really unethical. Like, and yeah, and there are like methods of developing like practices that are really effective that are not scientific. And
Hmm.
you can follow the
Yeah.
method. It's not the scientific method, and it'll still result in really good things
Yeah.
for whatever your value definition of good is.
Yeah.
Um,
I almost view it as something like you could over-index on objective um things or on subjective things. And I think like in the past I
yeah,
did focus a bit too much on objective things without even like properly acknowledging that my perspective is entirely subjective and that there's like, okay, I could actually do reality investigation from a subjective standpoint,
mhm,
which looks quite a bit different from science and more
yeah.
like meditation. And
It
there
still
are
has
benefits from
value,
that.
right? Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
there's things I was missing. Like, um, and another way I kind of like thinking about it is because I have a security background. Uh, like it kind of has the aesthetic of brain hacking in a way. It's like, okay, these are the sensations that are coming up from my brain, and I can react to them in different ways that actually, moves me in a positive direction. Um,
Right.
and yeah, I enjoy that.
So that's understandable. That is an enjoyable activity.
Mhm.
Maybe not for
Mhm.
everyone.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, but do you see that balancing act as part of the program that you're engaged in, or are you focused on the subjective side in terms of the work you're doing? I mean, personally, both are important, but
Could you expand on the balancing, what the balancing act means
sure,
to
sure. Like I was saying, the I was asserting, and you agreed that this like objective grounding in reality toolkit and the internal alignment toolkit are mostly if there's a dependency, it's a weak one. Like they're mostly independent. You can have a lot of subjective internal alignment and also be pretty ungrounded from reality potentially, or
Mhm.
moderately ungrounded. And
Yeah.
in some fields, moderate ungrounding is actually pretty harmful.
Mhm.
And then likewise, you can have someone who's very grounded in the object level stuff, and they are internally a mess.
Yep.
And in order to do engineering work in or policy work or any of this sort of work that's tied with alignment on a technical or societal level, you need both to be in balance.
Mhm.
Because yeah, if your internals are all wonky, then all the ought questions are not going to be answered right. There's going to be some sort of like the things you're doing aren't really going to be aligned with things even you want or what anyone else wants. And if you're ungrounded from reality, then your ability to actually make the world change the way you want it to
Yes.
change is unglued, right? Yeah.
Uh, yeah. I like the I think that is one of the reasons why yeah, Buddhism didn't spread as much, or like the ideas haven't spread as much as they could, because the monks just spent all the time in a monastery and became very internally aligned. But yeah,
Yeah.
that
Very
that
unglued.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's my impression.
Yeah.
And yeah, so I think it's entirely possible to combine them in a good way, in a way that provides benefits of both. Um, though there is like, I guess, something of a prioritization, because in my experience for the internal stuff there is like practices and like meditation which takes time, and during that time you're not, I don't know, you're not doing other more what you might say are more grounded things,
Mhm.
but it seems helpful and important to me to do both. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, there's some sort of view where you have to look at the whole system and say, well, in the grand scheme, the time that you're spent meditating is worth it because then you have
Yeah.
the big statement of your value system or whatever.
Mhm. Yeah.
And like, yeah. And if you narrow it down to if I spend 2 hours meditating, then that's 2 hours I'm not hacking, so I'm less effective. It's like,
Yeah.
yeah, there's
Yeah. Yeah. I would tend towards thinking of it as like a balancing act and hoping that there are like sort of psychological technologies we can develop that make it more time efficient. Uh,
hmm, time efficient. That's interesting. Why do you think that's important?
because I don't think we have a lot of time. I think the the course of like the human history or history of life is probably going to be determined in the not too distant future. Um,
Okay. That many people share that opinion
yeah.
in certain communities for sure. Um, we haven't yet talked about the ways in which you think AI can scale what you're trying to do. Could you tell us more about that?
Yeah. So one is like just personalized advice, mentoring, coaching. Um, that's a big one. Yeah, I'll just stick with that.
Okay, personalized advice, mentoring,
Yeah.
coaching. Is anyone doing that effectively yet?
I've heard of, okay, well, I guess the first thing is that Alton's worked on tools and with friends, and they seem to be quite helpful. I've just used ChatGPT and felt like I've gotten value out of it if I ask the right questions. I've heard of other
There are other
like
services like
therapy
this right now.
services. Okay, which
And
one?
it could do this in greater fidelity,
Nice.
poised, which is giving us real-time feedback on using hedging words or filler words. And similarly, just extrapolating from that, it's like Grammarly, but for your emotional affect or when you're communicating with your romantic partner about things, to flag certain patterns in you, to show up more consciously in the most crucial conversations of your life, both there or in negotiation context or business context, or talking you through your personal mission, knowing that when people have greater clarity there, that echoes to every meaningful area of their life.
Hmm.
And that is right now that technically it works and people can get it is an open source free thing. And it just listens in and then it transcribes it. And then you can query that conversation through a set of free generated prompts that I just like give to people. And that's like, it's very hands-on, of course, but that could be entirely automated. And that's just a matter of like some amount of programming that's totally available.
Okay. So for anyone watching this who is not familiar with Alton, Alton is one of the most proficient LLM users I know. He uses it for a lot of different things. He's also used several different tools and experimented with using them before. I'm actually going to ask for a digression. You said that right now you're using one tool. You said Poised. Is that the name of the tool?
Yeah. And that one's tracking real time right now. It's showing us the filler words that we use, such as apparently one of us used the word on this side. It's only tracking and listening on this side. It gives us the talk time. It points out hedging words, number of questions asked, pace.
Okay.
And I believe there are other options you can choose or select on here. And then at the end, it'll give you coaching on how I could have more powerfully communicated what I want to communicate in this call.
Mhm. Tracking reminds me of Toastmasters.
Yes,
There it goes. So, but it's not tracking my speech.
correct. It only tracks on this side.
Interesting. That's too bad. Is it
And
possible to
maybe
change
for
the
legal
settings so that it
reasons,
can do so? Yeah,
but
possible.
I think
Interesting.
or subscription things, yeah.
Also possible. Yeah. Um, do you, Nolan, this is directed at you, see any risks associated with using large language models for coaching? Or are there any risks you've thought about and rejected too? Is also interesting.
Yeah. Yes, definitely. I think there's a lot of ways coaching can go badly, or like you can get the wrong advice. One of the and yeah, before deploying something like that, I would definitely want to go way more in depth than I have. This is more like aspirationally, this is something that could benefit, or it's one of the things that an avenue that's promising to me. I totally agree that there's a bunch of risks. One of the things I like about it is that different people can benefit from different advice, and personalized advice seems very powerful. Yeah, I like the don't, or like there's like I don't know. You had some good sayings that were like the opposite of what normal advice were, which might benefit. Like
Powerful tools
yeah,
are double-edged swords. Should you reverse any advice you hear? If we can apply the same thing to the internet or any powerful tool, then is it that distinct of an argument? Maybe for the scale that we intend with and how AI is going to impact so much of everything.
Yeah.
And it is good to be mindful of these things.
Right.
I don't
So
know
like in the
specific quotes you're referring to, but there's a frame,
yes,
Slate Star Codex. Should you reverse any advice that you hear? To the same extent, we should be hesitant and be concerned about the risks. We should also be concerned about the opportunity cost of not deploying this sooner. And I get that can be applied for accelerationist frames too, but
right. It can be. I think one of the problems is when you have an asymmetry between the evaluation of risk versus the evaluation of benefit, that
yeah,
that advice is bad advice. For example, in the case of basically anything with large amounts of capital being thrown at it, there's going to be a strong optimism bias towards indexing the benefit over the risk. Now, like when you're talking about, and you alluded to this as well, AI is it's a dual use tool or even an omni use tool, but the amount of generality it has is unprecedented. And the degree to which it scales is also weird when it's so general.
yeah. Well, I'm saying that's why I agree around things like acceleration is for AI generally, distinct from a coaching bot AI that speaks in your own language when you're negotiating the most important conversations in your life.
Well, so here's the argument that I would make about why you should be a little bit concerned about building not like a specific instance of a coaching bot, but researching how to build a coaching bot, which is that if you care about the coaching bot, you're going to want to track success. And the tools that you would build in order to successfully track success and also update the bot to achieve whatever your success metric is has a couple of risks. One of them is that you may define success incorrectly. And if the tool is effective at achieving that goal, then you could have inadvertently created a large number of misaligned humans. That's risk one. Risk,
So you have
so
it that
that,
this tool would cause misaligned humans where there otherwise wouldn't be misaligned humans, or you're
correct. That's a
empowering
potential
programs?
concern. No, that's
Wow.
like the direct first level concern is that if
Okay.
you
Got
if
it.
you create an automated tool that self improves and that optimizes on a metric, which it would be if you have any optimization running, it's going to be optimizing on some sort of metric. It could be an arbitrarily complex one, but and it might even be a second order metric. But if you're optimizing on that and that metric is different from what you actually wanted, then you are going to end up programming in the difference between what you wanted and the metric that you actually implemented. And if you scale that, that's the size of the harm that you've done. So that's concern
This
one.
doesn't net affect. I mean, like, what about the positive or the upside? You're
Well,
saying,
yeah, there could be an upside. There absolutely could be. So you might say, okay, there is some, that's the downside, but there's the upside of you got it mostly right, and you just scaled that out. So on net,
yeah,
you did good.
well, exactly.
That
So
you could,
I want to distinguish it from like the internet being used for trafficking and the internet
okay,
also
so
used for
like
commerce.
I'm not talking about an internet type case. I'm talking about the specific case of rolling out the system at a large scale. And so that's not using it as a system. This is a specific
Okay.
tool that is designed to change people's behavior. That's the ultimate risk of behavior change. That like you may not know what the effects are on a large scale, and there may be a discrepancy between what you want to achieve.
Yeah.
You know, those sort of things. That's only one category. There's a completely different category, which is the internet-like risk, which is that if you build a generic tool that can optimize generic things, it can be used in generic ways to optimize for generic goals. And the multi-use optimization may, for example, be used in order to strengthen a society around a militaristic national identity, for example. And that's only one example of the many arbitrary goals that might be used by communities in order to strengthen whatever their internal community values are in arbitrary ways. And
Yeah, it's
what
that's
the
already
net,
happening for sure.
oh, it's already happening for sure, just not in a well-organized way. If you are advancing research to do that, even if your goals are good, then you are also advancing the ability of communities that want to do these things to do that by nature.
Yeah, that seems to be good to be mindful of. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it's worth being mindful of. It doesn't mean not to do the thing, but it does mean thinking through things like case one, which is how might I inadvertently be training people into undesirable behavior?
Yeah.
And
Oh yeah.
thing
Yeah.
two, yeah.
Definitely. This
So,
feels definitely
yeah.
like a non-starter
Yeah.
without having thought of this. Very
Yeah.
great.
Right. But I think that
And like
those are
we're so
both
far from
things
that. I
that
want to
people,
cross that bridge when we get to it. And also the
yeah,
first passes, several results are like having thought those through, there's no large or louder flag. So maybe I'm missing some nuance that you're still pointing to that I'm not getting because I
guess
I believe I'd factor that in. Yeah.
yeah, the main point that I'm getting at is that you can't factor it in. Like you can, but you're going to create those categories of problems no matter what you do.
Yeah. Through inaction too, it's really the opportunity cost.
Sure. And there's always the consideration that, you know, there may be a way to deploy that reduces those risks. That gets the 80-20. And yeah, they just need to be very top of mind, like both of them do. And you also have to be in the position where if, like, for example, you look at case two and you say, hey, the asymmetry here is so big that I shouldn't be achieving this good I know I can achieve because it will cause more harm in the long run. Which I haven't seen.
I'm here with you. I continue to be listening for this, and I have a whole crew of people I continually check in with these things about.
Yeah, I know, absolutely. And I think that people who are doing that can still be motivated to make the decision to keep going. because they're like, oh, but we can do good now. And that's a bigger feature of a lot of like let's look at OpenAI. Like they explicitly went in with that goal, and if you look at what they're doing now, it's already misaligned with what they originally intended to do.
Yeah. One of the things that I'd hope for with less internal and interpersonal resistance is that concerns like this can be very, I guess, easily integrated and discussed.
Yeah,
Yeah, and so yeah, and I appreciate you bringing them up. How I personally feel right now is that it is like very like this is like an avenue that I'm considering eventually exploring. And
yeah,
I totally agree that like yes, I'm very used to worst case scenario thinking.
yeah,
Um, and and I agree that it needs to be well integrated. It can't just be ignored because like in order to do the thing that we're kind of may in some unintegrated way be kind of biased towards doing. Um,
yeah.
yeah, and so really how I approach that now is just like really feeling into the negative consequences for it, like as viscerally as possible, and uh, and acknowledging it,
Mhm.
and then moving from there and seeing and also again like talking with you and other people, seeing
Yeah, absolutely.
like networking as much as we can.
Yeah.
Um,
So yeah, and I'm thinking about these, and I don't really consider them like insofar as it's a worst case scenario, it's a matter of scale, because to some degree these will be problems that you have to address, and you address them more or less successfully. And it may also be the case that successfully addressing these issues goes beyond the scope of your immediate organization. Like you may be building a tool, and the real effective society-wide way to address the problem and still get the benefit is government regulation, for example. How do you feel about your responsibility to engage with like other forces beyond what's in your immediate locus of control? And like, what responsibility do you bear there? What can you do, or what should you do?
yeah.
Yeah.
For me, talking with many other people sounds like a really good starting point.
Okay. Fair. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Pretty cool. So for background, I work at a think tank, and um, so I think a lot about like the big system and how can I make things less bad and more good.
Hmm.
And there are clearly benefits to systems like the ones that you're talking about. Being able to scale um, wellness, well-being, and internal alignment is a good thing, and being able to scale the types of education that's available to people is a good thing. There are many other benefits to AI that are good things, and there's at the extreme like a lot of potential benefit. And I end up in a position where I need to think a lot about how the things that are happening in the world are getting us closer or further away from the good things.
Sorry, could
So I don't know.
could you repeat that last part again? I missed a word.
Yeah, I'm in a position where I spend a lot of time thinking about how hard to reverse or irreversible decisions get us closer or further away from good things.
Mm.
And so I'm a little biased towards like how reversible is something, like how slowly should we go, how fast, like in service of some good, like what's the right balance to find. So that's like the mind space I'm in a lot.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. Those are important considerations. Yeah, it feels a bit disconnected from where I'm at right now,
Yeah.
because
Okay.
like yeah, I don't even have the beginnings of a system like that.
Okay.
I feel like I'm very in a exploratory stage. But yeah, I think those are good to integrate. Um,
Yeah.
yeah.
Very cool.
Yes, yes.
We're
We
getting
don't want to
close to
take
the end
5
of.
minutes. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I was going to say as well.
Mhm.
we're in the last few minutes of the call. Do you have any closing thoughts or,
Hmm.
yeah,
Yeah, well, I'm grateful for this talk. Yeah, I've enjoyed it. Um, yeah, and it's I love that like an action item immediately came out for me. And I'm like, and most of them are around talking with more people. And so yeah, I appreciate that as well. Uh, and I'm really excited for that. Which is a great and a new feeling to be excited to be in new social situations for me. So yeah, happy to report that as well.
I'm very happy that you're able to report that. I'm glad you got some action items out of this and enjoyed the conversation. I know for myself, I enjoyed the conversation as well. Is there any plugging or like things you would like to leave the audience with? Like, go to this website, you can find me on social, or you should read this book, or you should find out about my
Um,
friend, or whatever.
yeah, I guess for me, a really good starting point was Romeo Stevens' writing. He did a series of talks with Anish Mollier, I believe that's how his name is pronounced, and that's available on Anish's blog. I think it's called Audacious Uncoiling. Um, yeah, that made a really big difference for me.
I'll post it.
So I appreciate it. Cool.
Yeah.
Okay. So for people listening, you'll be able to follow the links in the description of this video, probably within 24 hours. At least that's what I try to do. It will be there. Alton will put it there, or I will put it there. If you're watching on Facebook, I'm sure Alton will put it in the description or in a comment or something.
Yeah.
All right. Very good. Any other resources that people should be aware of or explore?
That's by far the most salient for me. It's a combination of kind of Buddhism and EA rationalist thinking that just like hit me right where it needed to hit me. And I think, and that itself has the links to a bunch of other resources. Which
Fantastic.
are all good. Yeah.
Yeah. You don't have any personal plugs just to advance yourself or nothing like that?
No.
All right.
I would like to encourage people to come by and to meet Nolan and to support this whole alignment ecosystem. That's something I want to plug, and to ping me about ways that they can participate.
Great. Beautiful. Well, thank you, Nolan Kent. It was really nice to get to talk to you today and learn more about you and what you're doing.
Great. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks,
Yeah.
Andrew. Thanks for evoking and eliciting so many beautiful new sides.
Thank you. All right. So this has been the AI Safety Salon podcast. Give it a few seconds and then goodbye.